The game is definitely survivor-sided. The game is already hunter-sided, just shows how survivor-sided this game is. Looks like the community is split, but don't worry because NetEase has just settled the debate. Or did they? For years we've been wondering and guessing, theorizing as to which side was the strongest in Identity V. Begging for NetEase, the developers of Identity V, to release stats so we could finally bury our hatchets for good. For years we had nothing, until this week. In the ranking environment, with data, survivors are not dominant. In Tier 7, survivors won 27% of the time, tie 29% of the time, and lose 44% of the time. This is exactly what NetEase said in their recent Q&A on their Twitter. So that's it. NetEase has resolved the debate. Identity V is hunter-sided. We can finally move on. No, we can't. These stats, although very interesting and quite informative, aren't everything. As a clarification, I am majorly a hunter main and have been for the majority of my Identity V career, if you want to call it like that, I guess. But I made sure that for this video I would talk to some of my friends that are survivor mains or play both sides to get their views on these statistics. Of course, I can't stop being biased, but I can try to have as little bias as possible. Cypher rush, 3 cypher machines popping before you can even get the first person on chair, 1 to 2 cypher machines remaining by the time they have rescued that survivor and have been knocked down after their tide turner effect has run out. This is something that casual hunter mains or on and off hunter players will be very familiar with. Another thing they'll be familiar with is survivors having abilities that can help them auto-kite, take multiple hits, or stun you into oblivion. These are all very common experiences for hunters, but somehow despite all of these odds, hunters are still statistically coming out on top. Why is this? The lower we go down in the tiers, the more we notice that hunters just have a higher and higher win rate. This is most probably due to the so-called random effect, that's what I'm going to call it. I'd assume that a lot of the players in Identity V play with 0 to 2 friends in rank, and we all know that randoms can be questionable at best. Yet we are all randoms to somebody, so that doesn't completely account for it, since hunters still usually suffer from cypher machine popping way too quickly even with complete randoms in matches. Randoms do make big mistakes that do usually lead to the hunters winning, and that is definitely one of the reasons why hunter mains say the game is survivor-sided, since they know that without those big mistakes made by the survivors, they probably wouldn't have won that match at all. If the players played in sync, then the game is heavily against the hunter, but once again that just isn't the case. Teams aren't usually in sync, leading often, maybe a big part of this 44% win rate that hunters have, to a win for the hunter. There is more to this though, since quite often teams are in sync and survivors make little to no game-changing mistakes. This is when hunters feel like the game is against them, and I think that it is. A hunter mistake is much more detrimental and less forgiving than a survivor's mistake as a whole. There are 3 other people that can pick up the slack if one survivor goes down, but as a hunter, if you miss that hit or that ability, you now have to accept the consequences and wait that precious time to be able to rectify it. Time that you just don't have as a hunter, as every second is an extra 1.35% of one cypher machine decoded. To understand how well the game is balanced towards voice chat teams and party teams, we would also need NetEase to release VC rate stats. This would give us a better picture as to how well this game is balanced towards a more competitive level. Okay, let's talk about Tier 7, where technically the most competitive and hardened players compete in rank matches to prove their worth. If hunters are winning against the best survivors, then doesn't that mean that hunters are just stronger? Not necessarily. One thing that is difficult to take into consideration when balancing an asymmetrical game is exactly that. It's asymmetrical. Either side is very different than the other. In the case of survivors, 3 other people in the match are critical to your success, but survivors can also be carried through the ranks without necessarily ever having done much more than rescue. This is often the case with overall knowledge of the game, as the average Manticore player, for example, knows much more about the intricacies of the game than a Griffin survivor of the same tier, at least from my experience. Hunters every single match depends on their ability to chase, pressure survivors, and more. Yet most matches survivors will never even show off their kiting skills after they spend their time finishing Cypher Machine after Cypher Machine as their teammate kites the hunter. Apply this to tier 7 plus and you start to see that the average tier 7 hunter is going to be massively more experienced at the game than the average survivor of the same tier, even if we're talking about peak tier. And this is not always the case, but just out of pure active playtime, hunters have been battle hardened much more. That could also lead them to dominating more often in some cases. How do you balance that? That's a difficult question that I don't know the answer to yet. What isn't difficult though is pressing that join button next to the subscribe button to join the Super or Ultra Phoenix squad and get exclusive emotes and a badge next to your name in the comment section and also on live streams that I do every week. Now that isn't too difficult, is it? Going back to the video, this skill gap is increased even more due to the low amount of hunter players, at least on our server, the NAU server, because I cannot speak for other servers. Queue times for survivors are generally much longer at most tiers, in some cases being instant for hunters and over 20 minutes for survivors. This means that there are a mix of low and high skilled players joining the survivor queue for each tier, some with more knowledge and some with less. Yet, as is the case for asymmetrical games, playing the solo role that is hunter is much more daunting to play. Less players are interested in playing it. It is just more stressful if everything depends on you for each match. This probably means that the average person playing hunter in rank is going to be much more confident in their skills than the average survivor playing rank, once again leading to a massive skill gap between players within each tier. I have mentioned this in previous videos, but there just aren't enough incentives for players to pick hunter. I've even heard that playing survivor actually earns you points easier, as decoding and such have been buffed to give you more rank points. I am not quite sure as to the validity of this, but if a hunter has less points for doing more than an average survivor does during the match, then why play it at all? NetEase really needs to find a way to inject more hunters into rank. I think if this happened, we would see the stats change drastically. I want to touch briefly on the topic of meta characters, although this is a difficult one, and how often hunters in high tiers are playing the same 2 to 3 hunters, some cases only playing 1 hunter, meaning they are often very skilled in everything related to that one character. But in the case of survivors, the character you pick in rank isn't really game ending. 1 to 2 players picking non-meta survivors can usually still score you the same result as long as the rest of the team plays a meta character. A lack of variety on the hunter side leads to high tier hunters being incredibly skilled with the ins and outs of their preferred character, but survivors being once again less knowledgeable and less proficient with their picks. This is a massive assumption on my behalf though, so please don't take my word for it. So, is this game survivor-sided? The answer is still unknown. Even if NetEase tries to brush the question under the table with some useful but lacking stats, I still think the debate is open, and I hope that everyone can take both sides' opinions into consideration as we continue forwards. All we want is a fun game that isn't frustrating for either side to play. Oh, can we also fix ping please, NetEase? Do you wonder why it's so difficult to balance characters in Identity 5? Then you need to check out this video here to find out some of the big reasons why Identity 5 doesn't go too crazy on adjustments.